things have happened in our green room tonight. First of all, Bitya, I'm sure many of you were enormously moved to hear of the courage of the young girl who was raped and stood up to her assailants. Well, I've got to tell you something great that just happened. Manju and Sudhir Dhingra from Orient Craft have agreed to fund her education. Oh. And something else wonderful has happened. Right, Kasturi? The incredibly moving story of the young, the grandmother actually, who went to Saudi Arabia to work to provide for her children and her whole family, and suffered the terrible ordeal of having her arm cut off. Nita Ambani and their Reliance Foundation are going to fund the education of her 5 grandchildren. I'm so impressed by the fact that they were moved by these stories into wanting to take direct action. That is what I consider enormously exciting.
But I mean, that is the power of stories, isn't it?
That's the power of stories.
Frankly, Tina, of creating a forum where those stories are heard. I mean, you know, I consider myself a storyteller, but then it's so humbling the real life stories that I've heard today, and the commonality of the stories. I mean, stories of resilience and suffering, but also, I mean, how many times have we all heard the word dignity mentioned today? And even before we came on, Charu, an extraordinary makeup artist who's made you look incredibly beautiful and me look decent. Thank you, Charu. She was just telling me as she was applying lipstick to me how just this year she challenged the Supreme Court ruling that women could not be makeup artists in Bollywood. They could do hair, but they could not do makeup.
Wow.
No one.
Why wasn't we interviewed Charu?
Yes, well, I'm happy to go. She's far more interested than me. And she was the only woman, there was no support behind her, and she went to the Supreme Court, and this year she won the right to be a makeup artist in Bollywood, and already 400 women have become makeup artists in her way. It's incredible.
It is the power of story, as you rightly said. Well, you know, Kate, I know that you've really become more and more engaged, really, in a sense, in the sort of the wider world. I mean, you've always been a person who brought, you know, tremendous sensitivity to all these roles that you've played. But you've also, in recent years, I think, you're turning more and more out to the issues of the world. What's the change? What brought this about? Your increasing engagement with humanitarian issues.
Well, 8 years ago, my husband and I returned to Australia to take, I'm a very private person, and to take on a very public position running the Sydney Theatre Company. It's the largest of the state theatre companies, and so even though we receive very little government funding, we became advocates for the sector as well as producing work. So I think it forced us in a way to become part of the national cultural conversation. And as a result of that, I suppose my children are of an age now, not now baby, but where, you know, I have a little bit more time on my hands. And that, I mean, talking about women stepping up to the plate, it is often the duties of, I mean, I have a very supportive partner, but being bound up in family issues often prevents one from engaging in the broader world, and I think probably I was a little bit guilty of that.
Now, do you think that movies themselves can be agents of change? I mean, do you get attracted to roles because you feel that they are going to illuminate issues, or is it really only about, this is great material and I want to do it?
Well, I'm not a political animal by nature, and I don't think that, I think art and cultural product, it's a provocation, but I don't see my role as a political one. For instance, it was really interesting to hear the extraordinary women behind Fire, which is as revolutionary in 96 as it is now, and I've just recently made a film with Todd Haynes about 2 women falling in love in the 1950s, released this year. And the film itself is not political, but what happens is once it's released into the wider world, and it's all about context, isn't it? So the work can become political, but my motivation to get involved in it is really just about the stimulation of the conversation and the hope that if I'm engaged, then people are. But I do think your role as an actor, as an artist, is not to be polite, it's to provoke, it's not there to be liked. I mean, people will dislike what you do as much as they like it, but it's to provoke a conversation. But you can't necessarily then try and micromanage it. So, I mean, I'm interested in certainly our work at the theatre company, we were very interested in, we did a work about drought at the time that there was a terrible, terrible drought, and so we went into remote communities and worked with community members to sort of tell their stories back to them. I mean, a lot of farmers were suiciding at the time, and it was a very powerful work, and so I think that sort of level of stuff is important, but it's...
Well, in the filming of Carol, it's an extraordinarily moving and sensitive film about an older woman who falls in love with a younger...
I'm the older woman, not the older woman.
An affluent older woman who falls in love with a girl who works at a department store, played by Rooney Mara. What kind of psychology did you bring to the creation of Carol? Because there's such a sense of you're inhabiting this woman who's going through such a sort of inner conflict, and at the same time this enormous passion.
You're doing it right now.
I'm trying. I know, but you see what I'm doing?
I've spoken to you before.
No, it's just, I want to know what went into that part. How did you create that part?
But see, it was created by another woman already. Patricia Highsmith wrote the novel. And it's very interesting to be in dialogue, even though I never met Patricia Highsmith, but with such an interesting woman. And then Phyllis Nage wrote an incredible screenplay. So already I'm in dialogue with two incredible women who've made enormous suggestions. And the interesting thing about working with Todd, and Shekhar Kapur is a director like this as well. He is masculine enough to include a feminine sensibility. And so Todd's frame of reference was all of these female photographers who were working, some of them underground and not recognised in their lifetimes, during the 50s. And so the gaze of the film is inherently and richly female. So it was part of the gaze that I worked with as much as the psychology of the character.
Yeah, richly female is what I was sort of trying to drive at in that hectic body language. You're also, of course, in the film, it's also about age difference. I mean, the barrier to love between these two women is also not just gender, it's being the same gender, but also it's about an older woman and a younger woman.
Well, like fire, yes.
Yeah, very similar in that sort of sense, which is very, very interesting indeed. Many directors have talked about what they call the fluidity of your acting. Actually, Shekhar Kapur said, you're willing to throw yourself into a chaotic state out of which something will arise. What did he mean?
Try being at our house at 6 a.m. and Shekhar will see chaos. I don't know. I don't think. I mean, it's. Think of all the people that we've listened to today. I mean, life is chaotic. I mean, you know, Shekhar's email is existing chaos. I mean, he, for one, understands that. I think. I mean, if you're involved and engaged in an empathetic way, as one has to be when you're trying to inhabit another person's psychology. And that's what I love about being an actor, is sort of, it's like active anthropology. You get to sort of really investigate not only a person, but the whole history that that person and the people that they move with, you know, what they bring to it. I mean, now I've forgotten the question.
No, well, no, I think what I'm trying to drive at is, you know, creating the Elizabeth I, you know, tell us how you went about it, really. I mean, how did you decide, how did you learn to inhabit or create a character of Elizabeth I?
Well, look,
in Shekhar's movie.
Well, yes, I'm a passionate lover of history, and I bemoan the fact, we've talked a lot today about education, that history, maths, there's numeracy and literacy, which is prized, but I think history is the subject that every child, history and geography, we all need to make sure our children have a broad sense of the, you know, geopolitics and the history of that, because it's that will carry us into the future. So I was passionate about Elizabethan history, and Shekhar couldn't have cared less. He was more excited by the fact that, you know, there was an Indian and Australian, two people who'd been colonised by the British, reinventing British history.
It's an act of revenge.
You know, he and I fought the whole way along. You know, it was a healthy, productive fight, and I think sometimes, if everyone is on the same page, if everyone is in agreement, then the creative outcome can be a little bit beige. I mean, that's why it's important that, you know, like the other night after the Paris bombings, I forced myself to watch Fox News, because I thought I want to know what other people think about this, people that I might not necessarily agree with, because you need to have a complexity, a sense of the complexity of the situation, and the same was with that role. It was Shekhar and I fought the whole way along.
So which of the directors that you work with do you feel has elicited the most, gratifying performance? I
God.
know, go on, play favourites a little bit. Tell me about some of the directors and what they elicit from you.
I mean, meeting and working with Shekar was a real turning point for me. I mean, he really fought for me. I mean, I was an unknown Australian actress. He'd heard about me playing Nina in A Seagull on stage in Australia, and he just instinctually went for me and fought for me all the way along. So that was an incredible vote of confidence, which sort of changed the playing field. I mean, you only need one person to believe in you. It's like, the one teacher who you have, the rest could be shit, but you have one good one, and that'll carry you through your whole education.